Back to our questions. Can these bones live? What is the meaning of it all? In the prophecy of Ezekiel, the resurrection of the dry bones was a four-step process. First, a thunderous noise and shaking brought the bones together. Second, the regathered bones took on sinew and flesh. Third, skin covered the bones. And fourth, after a lapse of time, breath came into the bones and they lived. Let's look at these steps one by one and see how they have been fulfilled. As I prophesied, there was a noise, and behold, a shaking, and the bones came together, bone to his bone. From Russia, from Germany, from Syria, from the United States, from England, from South America, from Yemen, from India, from Ethiopia, from China and Japan, from all over the world. Israel, the people of history. Now, the people of a miracle. Dry bones, shaking off the dust of 20 centuries, regathering from every corner of the earth to Israel, returning by boat, by plane, and even by foot, returning to their ancient homeland. In an ever-growing stream, like the salmon to its spawning ground, attracted like metal filings to a magnet, the people of Israel returned to their native land. In one immigration after another, lured by the promises of Zionism, attracted by the financial investments of the Hirsches and the Rothschilds, driven by the pogroms of unfriendly nations, hunted by the persecutions of Nazism and the Holocaust. There was no place like home, and home was Israel. Next year in Jerusalem became this year in Jerusalem. However, though you may gather bones from the whole world, all you really have is a pile of dead bones. But this was only the first step in the fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecy. Sinew, flesh, skin, and life were yet to follow. Ezekiel continues, "And when I beheld, lo, the sinews and the flesh came upon them. And so it was, even in those days when nationhood was but a vague hope, an infrastructure began to develop. Under the encouragement of Chaim Weizmann, the Hebrew University was formed. The Haganah, Mossad, and Irgun formed the military muscle. Hadassah reached forth to provide medical services. Ben Yehuda resurrected the dead Hebrew language. A shadow government with such strong ambassadorial figures as David Ben-Gurion, Chaim Weizmann, Levi Eshkol, and Golda Meir began to function in exile. Bones and sinews were appearing. But still, they were just that, a government in exile. Skin had not yet appeared to give them the semblance of a nation. And the skin covered them from above. As the close of World War II exposed the atrocities of the Holocaust to the public eye, the climate was set for the United Nations motion to partition Palestine and pave the way for a Jewish state. On May 14, 1948, the ears of the Jewish people were pinned to their radios as the vote in the UN was tallied. In Jerusalem, David Ben-Gurion capped the results by announcing a new state, the State of Israel, reborn from the dust bins of history. Immediate recognition by world powers, beginning with President Harry Truman of the United States, gave legitimacy to their claim. Like any new birth, there were the pains of travail. Within hours, an Arab coalition attacked to drive the new state into the sea. Jordan, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia from the east, Lebanon and Syria from the north, Egypt from the south, blocked on the west by the Mediterranean naval armadas on the Western Sea. Outnumbered, surrounded, Outgunned, Israel fought back desperately. They fought back, and despite all odds, they won. The bones had skin. Israel was a nation. But there was no breath in them. To be alive in the sight of the nations around them was one thing. To be alive in the sight of God was another. In Ezekiel's prophecy, there was a time lapse between the bones assembling, growing sinews and flesh, being covered with skin, and then receiving the breath of life. Notice the last step. Prophesy unto the wind, prophesy, Son of Man, and say to the wind, Thus saith the Lord God, Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe upon these slain, that they may live. As with Adam in Eden, the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. In this prophecy, the breath, or life, was to come from the wind. Wind, throughout the Bible, even as in common usage, signifies trouble. Winds of war, winds of turmoil, winds of strife, causing men to be as turbulent as the wind-driven waves of the sea. Nor was it from wind alone, but specifically from the four winds, that this breath was to come. We read of these same four winds in a description of the future climactic battle of the ages in Revelation. I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth nor on any tree. These four winds of earth, a virtual whirlwind of anarchy, depict a period of trouble which particularly involves the newborn nation of Israel. This battle is described in great prophetic detail in the 38th and 39th chapters of Ezekiel. While time does not permit an elaborate discussion of these chapters, they describe an invasion of Israel by a coalition of nations from the north, during a time when Israel is dwelling in peace and safety. A parallel account in Zechariah informs us that Jerusalem will be attacked, and the city shall be taken. But the defeat will be temporary, for then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of the battle.